What you're about to hear isn't fiction. It's the kind of story that makes you question everything you thought you knew about kindness, cruelty, and the quiet strength of people the world overlooks. Maid. Billionaire. A fiancée who thought money made her untouchable. And one moment on a marble staircase that changed 3 lives forever. Stay with me because what happened next doesn't feel real. Hey everyone, welcome back. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from today? Which country do you belong to? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to know who's here with me tonight. Today's story is one of the most emotional, heartwarming, and honestly unforgettable stories I've ever shared. It's about a woman nobody respected, a family who thought power meant everything, and a secret buried for over 20 years. I won't tell you how it ends. You just have to stay with me. Naomi Bennett learned early in life that some people were born to be seen, and others were born to be useful. She was 29 years old, and for the past 3 years, she had worked as a housekeeper at Ashcombe Manor, a sprawling estate on the outskirts of Charleston, South Carolina, owned by one of the wealthiest men on the East Coast, Adrian Cole. Adrian had inherited his father's hotel empire at 26 and doubled it by 34. Forbes called him the quiet billionaire because he almost never gave interviews, almost never appeared at galas, and almost never let anyone close. Naomi had never once spoken to him directly in 3 years. She saw him from a distance, crossing the foyer in a dark coat, disappearing into his study, standing at the tall windows overlooking the garden with a coffee cup he never finished. He was a shadow in his own house, and she was invisible in it. Every morning, Naomi arrived at 5:30, before the sun touched the iron gates. She polished silver that cost more than her rent. She ironed sheets for a bed she'd never be allowed to sit on. She dusted portraits of people who had never once looked her in the eye. And every night, she drove 45 minutes back to a 2-bedroom apartment where her 6-year-old son Micah waited for her with a drawing taped to the door, usually of the two of them holding hands under a yellow sun. Micah had a heart condition. Not the kind that could be ignored and not the kind insurance fully covered. Naomi worked the housekeeping job during the day and cleaned offices 3 nights a week. She hadn't taken a full day off in 14 months. She hadn't cried in front of her son in longer than that, because she'd promised herself he would never see her break. 6 months ago, everything at Ashcombe Manor changed when Vanessa Sterling moved in. Vanessa was Adrian's fiancée, a former pageant queen turned social media personality with 2 million followers and an opinion about everything, especially about the help, as she liked to call the staff. She had grown up wealthy, married once before for money, divorced with a settlement, and set her sights on Adrian the moment she met him at a charity gala 18 months earlier. She was beautiful in the way magazine covers are beautiful. Sharp, polished, untouchable. And she despised Naomi from the very first week. It wasn't anything Naomi did. It was simply that Naomi existed in a way Vanessa couldn't control. Naomi didn't flinch when Vanessa snapped orders. She didn't grovel. She did her work quietly, efficiently, and with a dignity that made Vanessa's skin crawl, because dignity from a maid felt to Vanessa like defiance. "She looks at me like she knows something," Vanessa once told her assistant, only half joking. She had no idea how right she was. Because 23 years ago, before Naomi Bennett was born into the Bennett family, before the modest house in Beaufort, before her mother's long shifts as a hospital nurse, there had been a fire. A fire at a lake house that belonged to a young, wealthy family named Cole. A fire that nearly killed an 8-year-old boy trapped on the 2nd floor while his parents screamed helplessly from the yard below. A young woman working as a summer housekeeper for the Cole family had run back into the burning house. She'd carried that boy out through smoke so thick she couldn't see her own hands. She saved his life. And then, before anyone could properly thank her, before the ambulance even arrived, she disappeared into the crowd and vanished. Because she wasn't supposed to be in that wing of the house, because she was terrified of losing her job, because people like her didn't get to be heroes in stories about people like them. The Cole family never found her name. The boy grew up to be Adrian Cole. And the young woman who saved him had a daughter 14 years later. Her name was Naomi. Naomi had no idea that the mansion she cleaned every day belonged to the boy her mother once carried out of a burning house. She had no idea that a faded photograph still sat in a drawer in Adrian Cole's study. A photograph of a young housekeeper with soot on her cheeks and Naomi's exact same eyes. She only knew that Vanessa hated her, that her son needed surgery in 4 months, and that every single day at Ashcombe Manor felt like walking on glass. She had no idea the truth was already standing in the same house as her, waiting to be found. The morning it happened started like any other. Naomi arrived at Ashcombe Manor at 5:30, the sky still bruised with the last of the night. She let herself in through the servants' entrance, hung her coat, and began the routine she'd repeated 1,000 times. Coffee for the kitchen staff, fresh linens for the guest wing, silver polish for the dining hall, because Vanessa had planned an engagement luncheon that afternoon with 12 of Charleston's most photographed socialites. Vanessa had made it very clear, in a voice sharp enough to cut glass, that everything had to be flawless. "If one thing is out of place," she'd said the night before, staring directly at Naomi across the kitchen island, "I will know exactly who to blame." Naomi had simply nodded. She'd learned that arguing with Vanessa only made things worse, and worse in this house, sometimes meant losing hours she couldn't afford to lose. By 11 o'clock, the guests had begun arriving in a parade of designer heels and diamond earrings. Naomi moved through the halls like a ghost, refilling champagne, straightening centerpieces, disappearing into doorways whenever Vanessa's laughter grew too loud and too close. Adrian was there too, standing near the fireplace in a charcoal suit, nodding along to conversations he clearly wasn't listening to. Naomi noticed, she always noticed, the way his eyes sometimes drifted to the window, like he was somewhere else entirely. It was almost 1 o'clock when it happened. Naomi was carrying a silver tray with a single porcelain teacup, the good china, the set that had belonged to Adrian's grandmother, up the grand staircase to the second-floor sitting room where 2 of the guests had retreated to talk privately. She moved carefully the way she always did, watching each marble step beneath her low, sensible shoes. She never saw Vanessa coming up behind her. Later, no one could agree on exactly what happened first, whether Vanessa's heel caught on the runner, whether she stumbled reaching for her phone, or whether, as one guest quietly admitted afterward, Vanessa had simply been in too much of a hurry and hadn't been watching where she walked. What everyone did agree on was this: Vanessa collided into Naomi's shoulder hard enough to send them both off balance. Naomi, trying desperately to protect the tray and the priceless china in her hands, twisted her body away from the railing, and in doing so, lost her footing entirely. She fell hard onto the marble steps, her wrists slamming into the stone edge, the teacup shattering as scalding tea spilled down the stairs in a dark, spreading stain. Pain shot up Naomi's arm so sharp it stole her breath. And then Vanessa, recovering her own balance, cheeks flushed with humiliation in front of her 12 most important friends, did something that would replay in everyone's mind for weeks afterward. She looked down at Naomi crumpled on the stairs, cradling her wrist, tea soaking into her uniform, and instead of asking if she was hurt, Vanessa's face twisted into pure fury. "You clumsy, careless girl!" she shrieked, loud enough that every conversation in the house stopped. "Do you have any idea what that china was worth? Do you have any idea what you just cost me?" Naomi, still in shock, still in pain, tried to speak. "I'm sorry I didn't. You deserved it," Vanessa screamed, stepping closer, her voice cracking with rage and something uglier underneath it, the fear of looking foolish in front of her friends. You deserved to fall. Maybe now you'll actually watch where you're going instead of daydreaming through your one job. The room had gone completely silent. 12 guests stood frozen at the top of the stairs. Kitchen staff had gathered in the archway below. And no one, not one person, moved to help Naomi off the floor. That was when the front door of the study opened, and Adrian Cole stepped into the hallway, drawn by the sound of shattering porcelain and his fiancée's screaming voice. He stopped at the base of the stairs. And what he saw in the next 3 seconds would change everything. Adrian Cole did not often raise his voice. In 17 years of running a company with 12,000 employees, he had built a reputation for being calm under pressure, deliberate in his words, careful with his temper. But in that moment, standing at the base of the staircase, watching his fiancée scream down at a woman curled in pain on the marble steps, something inside him went very still and very cold. He saw Naomi's wrist, already swelling, cradled against her chest. He saw the tea soaking dark into the white fabric of her uniform. He saw the broken china scattered like ice across the stairs. And he saw Vanessa standing over her, hands on her hips, face twisted with an anger that had nothing to do with a teacup. Vanessa. His voice cut through the silence like a blade. What did you just say to her? Vanessa spun around and for half a second, just half a second, something flickered across her face. Not guilt. Calculation. Adrian, thank God, she just ruined your grandmother's china. She practically threw herself down the stairs. I heard what you said. Adrian's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. I heard every word. He walked past her without another glance and knelt beside Naomi on the stairs, something he had never done in 3 years of living in the same house as her. Up close, he could see the pain in her face, the way she was trying so hard not to cry in front of a room full of strangers. Can you move your fingers? He asked quietly. Naomi, stunned that he was speaking to her at all, let alone kneeling on the floor beside her in front of his own engagement guests, tried to flex her hand and winced. I think it's just sprained. We're going to the hospital. Now. He said it not as a request, but as a fact, already reaching to help her sit up. Behind him, Vanessa's composure cracked. Adrian, you cannot be serious. I have 12 guests here. This is my engagement luncheon. And you're going to leave to take the maid to urgent care. Adrian turned his head, and the guests would later say they had never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at Vanessa in that moment. Her name, he said slowly, is Naomi. And she has worked in this house for 3 years, and you have never once asked her name. The room seemed to hold its breath. She fell because of you, Adrian continued, his voice quiet but unbearably sharp. And instead of helping her up, you screamed that she deserved it. In my house. In front of my guests. She's staff, Adrian, Vanessa hissed, dropping her voice, though everyone could still hear her. You don't understand how these things work. If you don't set boundaries, they'll walk all over you. Stop talking. He stood up slowly, helping Naomi rise with careful hands, steadying her when she swayed. Just stop. It was in that moment, with Naomi standing unsteadily beside him, her injured wrist cradled against her chest, her uniform soaked in cold tea, that Adrian's eyes fell to her collar, where a thin gold chain had slipped free during the fall. A small charm hung from it. A tiny flame, no bigger than a fingernail, engraved with initials too small for most people to notice. But Adrian noticed, because he had seen that exact charm before. Not around Naomi's neck. In a photograph. A photograph that had sat in the top drawer of his study desk for over 20 years. A photograph of a young woman with soot on her face and fear in her eyes, standing just outside the frame of a burning lake house, a small flame charm barely visible at her collarbone in the one blurry photo anyone had managed to snap before she disappeared into the night. Adrian's breath caught in his throat. "Where?" he asked slowly, his voice suddenly unsteady in a way it hadn't been even moments before. "Did you get that necklace?" Naomi, confused and still in pain, touched the small charm instinctively. "It was my mother's," she said quietly. "She passed away when I was 14. It's the only thing of hers I have left." Adrian stared at the charm for a long moment, his mind racing backward through 23 years, and when he finally spoke, his voice had dropped to barely a whisper. "What was your mother's name?" "Grace," Naomi said, still holding her injured wrist, confused by the sudden intensity in his eyes. "Grace Bennett. Why?" Adrian didn't answer right away. He simply stood there on the stairs, staring at the flame charm resting against Naomi's collarbone, his whole body going still in a way that made even Vanessa fall silent behind him. The guests exchanged uncertain glances. No one understood what was happening, except Adrian, whose mind had traveled 23 years into the past in the space of a single breath. He was 8 years old again. He could smell smoke. He could feel heat pressing against his face, hear his own screaming, feel arms, small, strong, shaking arms, wrapping around him and pulling him through a hallway he couldn't see through the smoke. He remembered a voice, calm despite the chaos, telling him to hold his breath, to trust her, to keep moving. He remembered the cool night air hitting his face when they finally broke through the front door. He remembered his mother sobbing. He remembered looking around for the young woman who had carried him out, and finding no one there at all. She had vanished before anyone could learn her name. For 20 years, his family had searched, quietly, respectfully, without ever finding her. His mother had kept a single blurry photograph, taken by a neighbor's camera in the chaos of that night, showing a young housekeeper's face half turned away, a small flame charm just visible at her throat. Adrian had grown up staring at that photograph more times than he could count, wondering who she was, whether she was even still alive, whether he would ever get the chance to say the 2 words that had haunted him his entire adult life. "Thank you, Naomi," Adrian said, his voice trembling now in a way none of the guests had ever heard from him. "How old would your mother have been in the summer of 2003? Naomi blinked, thrown by the strange, specific question. "She would have been 22, I think." "Why are you asking me this?" Adrian turned and walked, almost stumbling, into his study, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. He returned less than a minute later holding a small, worn photograph, its edges soft from decades of handling. He held it out to Naomi with hands that weren't quite steady. "Is this her?" Naomi took the photograph carefully with her uninjured hand, and the moment her eyes landed on the blurry, soot-streaked young woman in the frame, something in her chest cracked open. She had seen this exact photo before, an almost identical one, kept in a small tin box her mother left behind, one Naomi had never fully understood the story behind. Her mother had always deflected questions about it, saying only, "It was a job I had once, a long time ago. Somewhere I don't like to remember." "That's her," Naomi whispered, her voice breaking. "That's my mother." Adrian sank slowly onto the bottom stair, the weight of 2 decades finally settling into his bones. "She saved my life," he said quietly, almost to himself. "There was a fire at my family's lake house the summer I was 8. I was trapped upstairs. Everyone thought I was going to die in that house. And then this housekeeper, this young woman nobody could ever find again, ran into the fire and carried me out. She saved my life, and then she disappeared, and my family spent years trying to find her so we could thank her properly. We never could." The room, full of Vanessa's designer-clad guests, had gone completely, utterly silent. "She never told me," Naomi said, tears now sliding freely down her face, oblivious to her throbbing wrist. "She never told me she saved someone's life. She never told me any of it." "She was terrified," Adrian said softly. "My father told me once. The fire department found out later that she wasn't even supposed to be in that part of the house that night. She could have lost her job. Maybe she thought that mattered more than being thanked." Naomi let out a broken, disbelieving laugh through her tears. "That sounds exactly like her." Vanessa, standing frozen at the top of the stairs, watched the scene unfold with a growing, sickening realization. The woman she had just screamed at, humiliated, and blamed in front of her most important friends was the daughter of the woman who had saved her fiancé's life. And she had just told her, in front of 12 witnesses, that she deserved to fall. "Adrian," Vanessa said weakly. "I didn't know." "You didn't ask," Adrian said, not even turning to look at her. "You never once asked her name in 3 years. That's the problem, Vanessa. It was never about knowing. It was about not caring enough to." The hospital waiting room was quiet except for the low hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of a television playing the evening news. Naomi sat in a plastic chair with her wrist now wrapped in a temporary splint, waiting for imaging results, still trying to process the last 2 hours of her life. Adrian sat beside her, not across the room, not standing at a respectful distance the way employers were supposed to, but directly beside her, his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. He had driven her himself, not sent a driver, not called an assistant to handle it. He had walked out of his own engagement luncheon, guests and fiancé and shattered china left behind, and driven Naomi to the hospital himself, refusing to let anyone else take his place. "You didn't have to do this," Naomi said quietly, breaking the silence. "I could have called a rideshare." "I know," Adrian said. "I wanted to." She studied him for a moment. This man she had cleaned up after for 3 years without ever really seeing him, and who apparently had spent 20 years searching for a piece of her family he never knew was already working in his house. "I still don't understand," she admitted. "You've had a photo of my mother for 20 years, and I've been dusting your bookshelves for 3, and neither of us knew." "I know," Adrian said again, shaking his head slowly. "My mother used to say fate doesn't announce itself. It just quietly rearranges things until the truth has nowhere left to hide." Naomi looked down at her splinted wrist. "My mom worked 3 jobs most of my childhood. She never talked about that summer. I always thought it was because it was a hard time for her. Money was tight, my grandmother was sick. I never imagined she'd run into a burning building for a stranger's child and just never told anyone. She saved my life and asked for nothing in return," Adrian said, his voice thick. "My family has more money than we could spend in 3 lifetimes, and we couldn't even give her a proper thank you, because she disappeared before we could learn her name. Do you know what that's like? Growing up knowing someone gave you your entire life, and you can't even tell them what that meant." Naomi felt tears sting her eyes again, exhaustion and grief and disbelief tangling together. "She passed away when I was 14. Breast cancer." She never got to hear how her life turned out, that her daughter grew up, had a son, is trying so hard to give him everything she couldn't always give me. Naomi's voice cracked. "My son Micah, he has a heart condition. He needs a procedure in a few months that insurance won't fully cover. That's part of why I've been working so many hours. Some nights I don't even see him awake." Adrian was quiet for a long moment, absorbing this. "I didn't know that either." "Nobody asks," Naomi said, not bitterly, just honestly. "That's what today taught me, I think. Nobody really asks." A nurse called Naomi's name, and Adrian stood immediately to walk with her, only to pause when his phone buzzed insistently in his pocket. He glanced at it. 17 missed calls, most from Vanessa, one from his assistant, and a text from Vanessa that simply read, "We need to talk about what happened. This is embarrassing for both of us." Adrian stared at the message for a long moment, something hardening behind his eyes. Then, without a word, he slid the phone back into his pocket and turned to follow Naomi into the exam room, choosing without hesitation where he actually wanted to be. By the time Naomi was discharged, wrist sprained but not broken, in a brace for 3 weeks, it was almost 9 at night. Adrian drove her home himself, insisting, despite her protests, that she could take a cab. When they pulled up outside her small apartment building, the porch light flickering weakly against the dark, Naomi hesitated with her hand on the door. "Thank you," she said. "For today. For all of it." "Naomi." Adrian turned in his seat to face her fully. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to know you can say no." She waited, cautious. "I want to help with Micah's surgery," he said. "Not as charity. Not as some kind of payback for what your mother did. Nothing could ever repay that. I want to help because it's the right thing to do, and because I have the ability to, and pretending otherwise would be a lie." Naomi's throat tightened. In 3 years at Ashcombe Manor, she had never once imagined a conversation like this. "Mr. Cole, I can't just—" "Adrian," he corrected gently. "Please." "Adrian." The name felt strange in her mouth. "I appreciate it more than you know. But I don't want you to feel obligated because of my mother. I don't want pity. And I definitely don't want charity that comes with strings." "No strings," Adrian said firmly. "I'm not asking you to quit your job or change anything about your life, unless that's what you want. I'm asking to help a little boy get the surgery he needs, because I have 23 years of gratitude toward his grandmother that I never got to express, and this is the closest I will ever get to expressing it." Naomi sat in silence for a long moment, tears sliding silently down her cheeks in the dark car. "Okay," she finally whispered. "Okay. Thank you." Before she got out of the car, Adrian added one more thing. "And Naomi, what happened today on the stairs? That's not going to happen again. Not to you, not in that house, not while I have any say in it." She looked at him, uncertain what he meant, but too exhausted to ask. She simply nodded and walked inside, where Micah was waiting up past his bedtime, curled on the couch with his babysitter, clutching a new drawing, this one of a big house with a staircase, and underneath it, in his careful 6-year-old handwriting, "Mommy is a hero too." She didn't tell him why she cried when she saw it. She just held him close and let herself, finally, feel something other than exhaustion. Meanwhile, back at Ashcombe Manor, Vanessa Sterling paced her bedroom in a fury that had nothing to do with broken china anymore. Her assistant had already warned her that 3 of the 12 guests from the luncheon had posted vague, pointed comments online about the way some people treat their staff. A gossip account had picked it up. By morning, it was trending under a hashtag Vanessa never wanted to see attached to her name. Hashtag "You deserved it." She had no idea yet that the video existed, that one of the caterers, horrified by what she'd witnessed on the stairs, had quietly recorded the last 30 seconds of the confrontation on her phone, capturing Vanessa's scream in crystal-clear audio. By the time Vanessa found out, it would already be too late to control. The video went viral overnight. It started as a grainy 30-second clip, Vanessa's face twisted with fury, her voice ringing out with brutal clarity. "You deserved it. Maybe now you'll actually watch where you're going." Followed by Adrian kneeling beside Naomi, his quiet, cutting words to Vanessa audible even through the shaky phone audio. "Her name is Naomi. And you have never once asked her name." By morning it had 4 million views. By the afternoon, it was on entertainment news segments, captioned things like, "Billionaire Fiancée's cruel outburst at housekeeper sparks outrage," and "The moment Adrian Cole chose decency over status." Vanessa's social media exploded, not with the adoring comments she was used to, but with a wave of fury she had never experienced in her life. Brands she'd partnered with quietly paused campaigns. A skincare company she'd been the face of for 2 years issued a statement, re-evaluating the partnership. Her follower count, which had always climbed steadily upward, began dropping by the thousands. She showed up at Ashcombe Manor that afternoon, mascara smudged, voice raw from crying, demanding to see Adrian. "You have to fix this," she said, pacing his study while he sat calmly behind his desk, unmoved. "You have to post something. Say it was taken out of context. Say I apologized, say we talked, say something. Adrian, my entire career is falling apart because of 30 seconds of video." "I'm not going to lie for you, Vanessa," Adrian said quietly. "You don't understand what this is doing to me." "I understand exactly what it's doing to you," Adrian said, finally looking up at her. "For the first time, people are seeing what I've watched happen in this house for the past 18 months. You've never treated the staff with respect. Not Naomi, not James in the garage, not Priya in the kitchen. I told myself it wasn't my business, that maybe I was misreading things. But I wasn't. And now the whole world has seen 30 seconds of a pattern I let go on for far too long." Vanessa stared at him, something shifting behind her eyes. Not remorse but calculation, the realization that pleading wasn't working. "So what, you're going to throw away 18 months, an engagement, everything we've built because of a housekeeper?" "Don't call her that," Adrian said, his voice dropping dangerously low. "Her name is Naomi. And no, I'm ending this because of who you showed me you are when you thought no one important was watching." The staircase just made it visible. Vanessa opened her mouth to argue and then closed it, seeing, perhaps for the first time, that there was nothing left to say that would change his mind. She left Ashcombe Manor that evening with 2 suitcases and a publicist frantically trying to draft a damage control statement that no one was interested in reading. 2 days later, Naomi received a call from Ashcombe Manor's HR office asking her to come in for a meeting, not with HR, but with Adrian directly. She arrived nervous, wrist still healing in its brace, uncertain what to expect. Adrian was waiting in his study, and beside him on the desk sat a folder. "I want to be up front," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "This isn't about the video, or the attention, or making myself look good. This is something I should have offered regardless of any of that." He slid the folder toward her. Inside were details for a full scholarship-style medical fund, not just covering Micah's surgery, but his ongoing cardiac care through adulthood, set up through a private family foundation Adrian's mother had run for years, largely dormant since her passing. "This isn't from me personally," Adrian clarified gently. "It's from the Cole Family Foundation. My mother started it to help families who needed it and couldn't ask. I think she would have wanted this." Naomi stared at the papers, hands trembling. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Adrian said. "Just let your son grow up healthy. That's all I'm asking." Word of what happened spread quickly through Ashcombe Manor staff. Not the gossip, not the viral video, but the quieter truth underneath it. That Adrian Cole had finally started seeing the people who kept his life running. He began greeting staff by name each morning, something he'd never consistently done before. He asked about Priya's daughter's college applications. He noticed when James in the garage came in limping and insisted he take the week off to see a doctor, fully paid. But it was his relationship with Naomi that changed the most. Carefully, respectfully, one conversation at a time. He didn't rush anything. He knew, better than most people with his kind of money, how easily gratitude could be mistaken for obligation, how easily kindness from someone powerful could feel like pressure to someone who wasn't. So instead he simply made space. He asked Naomi, once her wrist healed, if she'd like to move into a management role overseeing the household staff, with better pay, more reasonable hours, and actual respect built into the job description. Not because of who her mother was, but because, as he put it plainly, "I've watched you handle chaos with more grace than anyone I've ever employed. That's a skill, not an accident." Naomi accepted, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence as weeks passed and the promise proved real. For the first time in years, she wasn't working 3 jobs. She was home for dinner. She was there when Micah's surgery finally happened. Successful, uneventful, exactly as the doctors had hoped, and she was there, holding his small hand in the recovery room, when he opened his eyes and asked if they could go to the park that weekend, like nothing at all had happened. Adrian visited the hospital that day too, quietly, almost apologetically, carrying a small stuffed lion because someone told me kids like lions, and standing awkwardly in the doorway until Naomi waved him in. "You didn't have to come," she said, smiling through exhaustion. "I wanted to see how the bravest kid in Charleston was doing," Adrian said, and Micah, still groggy from anesthesia, gave him a thumbs up that made both adults laugh through unexpected tears. Over the following months, something quiet and unforced grew between Adrian and Naomi. Not rushed, not dramatic, but steady, built on the kind of respect neither of them had experienced much of in their own separate corners of an unfair world. He learned that Naomi laughed loudly and often, once she felt safe enough to. She learned that beneath the quiet, controlled billionaire exterior was a man who still kept his childhood drawings in a box in his closet, who still cried, quietly, once a year, on the anniversary of the fire that nearly took his life. One evening, months later, Adrian showed Naomi something he had never shown anyone outside his own family. The actual site of the old lake house, rebuilt years ago, where the fire had happened. They stood together at the edge of the water as the sun went down, and Adrian finally said the words he had carried for 23 years, unable to say them to the woman who deserved to hear them, and so he said them instead to her daughter. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for the life your mother gave me. I don't think I've ever really said that out loud to anyone." Naomi, tears in her eyes, took his hand. "She'd be so proud that it mattered this much to you. She really would." A year after the incident on the staircase, Ashcombe Manor looked, felt, and functioned like an entirely different house. Adrian had restructured staff wages across the board, implemented actual respect-based policies that weren't just words on paper, and quietly donated a portion of that year's company profits to a foundation supporting working single parents, inspired, everyone in his life now knew, by a woman he'd watched hold her family together with almost nothing for years. Naomi had grown into her new role fully, respected by the staff she now managed, present for every one of Micah's school events, finally able to breathe without the constant weight of impossible math sitting on her chest every night. Micah, now 7, had made a full recovery, running around the manor gardens with an energy that still made Naomi's heart catch every time she watched him, remembering how close they had come to a very different outcome. The video that had once threatened to define Vanessa's public image had long since faded from headlines, replaced by newer scandals, newer outrage cycles, the way viral moments always eventually do. But its impact lingered in quieter ways. In the dozens of messages Naomi still occasionally received from strangers online, thanking her for existing, for enduring, for the grace she'd shown even while lying injured on cold marble steps. In interviews Adrian gave, rare, careful, deliberate, about treating people with dignity regardless of the job title on their paycheck. Vanessa, for her part, had rebuilt a smaller, quieter life somewhere outside the spotlight she'd once craved, though whether she had truly changed or simply learned to hide her cruelty more carefully, no one at Ashcombe Manor could say for certain, and honestly, no one much cared to find out. It was on a warm evening in early spring, exactly 1 year after the staircase, that Adrian asked Naomi to meet him in the garden after Micah had gone to bed with the housekeeper who now happily watched him some evenings. She found Adrian standing near the same fountain where, months earlier, he'd first told her the full story of the fire. "I've been thinking about something," Adrian said, visibly nervous in a way she'd rarely seen him. "That's usually dangerous," Naomi teased gently, and he laughed, the tension breaking slightly. "A year ago, I met you as a stranger who happened to work in my house," he said. "And in the past year, I've learned you're the daughter of the woman who gave me my entire life. And somehow, impossibly, you've also become the person who makes the rest of my life feel worth living." Naomi's breath caught. "I'm not asking for anything right now," Adrian continued quickly. "I just needed you to know that. Whatever this is, whatever it becomes, I'm not in a hurry. I just know I want you in my life, for as long as you'll let me be in yours." Naomi, tears sliding down her cheeks for what felt like the 100th time that year, though this time entirely from joy, stepped forward and took his hand. "I think," she said softly, "my mother would like knowing her flame charm led us here." 2 years after the staircase, Ashcombe Manor hosted its first fully staff-inclusive holiday gathering, something unheard of in its 100-year history, where housekeepers, gardeners, chefs, and drivers sat at the same long table as Adrian Cole himself, sharing a meal as equals for one night, a tradition Adrian insisted on continuing every year from then on. Naomi sat beside him, Micah between them, now 8 years old and thriving, his laughter filling the dining hall that had once felt so cold and unwelcoming to his mother. On Naomi's finger sat a simple, elegant ring, not the flashy diamond Vanessa once wore, but something quieter, more meaningful, chosen because Adrian had noticed, in small moments over 2 years, exactly what kind of beauty Naomi actually valued. They had married the previous spring, in a small ceremony beside the rebuilt lake house, with Adrian's mother's old photograph of Grace Bennett displayed on a table near the altar. A quiet way of including the woman who, without ever knowing it, had set this entire story into motion 23 years earlier. Naomi often thought about that day on the staircase. The pain, the humiliation, the cruel words that had cut so deep in front of strangers. For a long time afterward, she wondered why it had to happen that way, why the truth had to arrive wrapped in such public pain. But looking around the table now, at her healthy son, at a husband who genuinely saw her, at a house that had transformed into a home built on respect instead of hierarchy, she understood something her mother had somehow always known. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives are the exact cracks through which the truth finally has room to breathe. Vanessa had screamed, "You deserved it," on that staircase, meaning it as cruelty, meaning it as punishment for a moment that wasn't even Naomi's fault. But looking back now, Naomi realized those words had accidentally become true in a way Vanessa never could have imagined, because what Naomi deserved, what she had always deserved, was to be seen, to be valued, to be treated with the basic human dignity that had been missing from so much of her life until that single, painful, transformative fall. She deserved a healthy son. She deserved a life without 3 exhausting jobs and never enough sleep. She deserved to learn the truth about her mother's quiet, extraordinary heroism. She deserved love that saw her fully, not despite where she came from, but sometimes powerfully because of it. If there's one thing this story teaches us, it's this. The way we treat people who can offer us nothing in return says everything about who we really are. Kindness is never wasted, even when it goes unnoticed for years, even when it's carried quietly by people who never ask for recognition. And sometimes, the smallest, most overlooked person in the room is carrying a legacy far greater than anyone around them could ever imagine. Naomi's mother ran into a burning building for a stranger's child, expecting nothing, not even a thank you. 2 decades later, that single act of selfless courage came back around in a way no one could have predicted, changing not just Naomi's life, but an entire household, an entire family forever. If this story moved you tonight, if it made you believe a little more in kindness, in dignity, in the quiet power of doing the right thing even when no one's watching, please take a moment to like this video. It genuinely helps this story reach more people who need to hear it. Subscribe to the channel if you want more stories like this one. real, raw, emotional journeys that remind us what truly matters. And if you know someone who needs a little hope today, someone who's been overlooked, someone who's been carrying more than their share quietly, please share this story with them. You never know whose life you might change with one small act of kindness. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. I'll see you in the next story.